Like I said, see them use.
All right, good morning. Did everyone have a good rest of your Halloween? Anyone else eat way too much candy? I ate way too much candy. I went to bed and I was like, I'm done with candy forever, or at least until a day, like at least a day from now. I have to tell you something kind of funny though. My children, Tuesday morning, I went in to wake up my kids and I walk in the room and they're like singing jingle bells and Christmas songs. And I was like, what's wrong with you guys? November is about Thanksgiving. I love Thanksgiving because it's food and football. It's like my day. I was made for Thanksgiving. My favorite colors are brown and orange. I love football. I love food. And I love my family. Thanksgiving is my day, right? But my family outvoted me 4-1, and they decorated for Christmas yesterday against my will. I was like, wait, we're skipping a holiday. I was like, we can have Thanksgiving with like Halloween or Thanksgiving and Christmas stuff. But no, we are like 100% decorated for Christmas, and my children are putting Christmas leaves on in my car. Yeah. That's right. That's right. There's so many funny like TikToks yesterday about like poor Thanksgiving being neglected, right? It happened in my house. Thanksgiving has been passed over, and I like refused. I put like my Thanksgiving quilt on our bed, and I'm like, there's one Thanksgiving thing happening. But I've been outvoted. I'm decorated for Christmas, but I'm not ready. So the red cups come out tomorrow, right? The Starbucks red cups. I think it's tomorrow or today. It's either today or tomorrow. You should know this. You don't know? Yeah, it's. Yeah.
Manager's telling me.
It's this week. I know it's this week because at the grocery store, the Starbucks there, the person they were unpacking them from a box last week. And I was like, no, not yet. And she's like, oh, it's next week. So yeah, we would skip Thanksgiving, which is sad. It's like one of my favorite holidays, like after Halloween. So, all right. So nice. All right. So we'll get back to this, and we obviously, like I said, we're in November now, so it's going to go really quickly from here. At least it always feels like it goes really quickly from here. So we will keep going with this, and then we're going to talk next about personality disorders, but we still have a little bit left with schizophrenia. We ended here, right? We talked about the catatonic symptoms and so on. And so now we'll talk about the course, the causes, and the treatment. And then we'll get into the next chapter, which is personality. So, and I mentioned this last time, this tends to affect men and women pretty equally, but it does tend to come a little bit later in men than it does in women. So men, you might see onset of schizophrenia like closer to their 30s, and women, it tends to be more in their 20s. And what we see is there's kind of 3 main phases that schizophrenia can go through: prodromal, active, and residual. And this would be a great like short answer question for you. What are the 3 phases of schizophrenia? Prodromal is when people are starting to have some signs of like deterioration. It's like the early signs of schizophrenia. My student that I shared with you last time would have been in this phase, right? Some things didn't seem quite right. Things didn't seem real all the time, but you're still able to function. You just kind of have some early signs that things are going downhill. Now, about 25% of people never progress past here. They get some early signs of like some prodromal phase kind of stuff, and it never gets worse. They never require treatment. They never go to full-blown active schizophrenia. So about a quarter of people never progress. About 50% of people go to the active phase. This is when you have full-blown active schizophrenia. You would require treatment, typically medication, which we'll talk more about in a minute. And then about 25% of people go to the residual phase. Things kind of fade out. Schizophrenia can kind of go away on its own for about 1/4 or 25% of people. So about 50% stay in that active phase, require treatment, maybe for their entire life. And about 1/4 of people go back to like early levels where they have some stuff, some maybe strange perceptions and things that they can't explain. But for the most part, they're doing okay. right? So we see there's kind of an interesting progression, and not everybody goes through all these stages. And sometimes it gets better on its own, which is why we, in the early days, we actually thought this was a dementia. The very, very first accounts of schizophrenia, we called dementia precoce, which meant early dementia. But dementias don't get better. Schizophrenia sometimes can actually kind of go away on its own. In terms of causes, there are a lot of biological causes of schizophrenia. And we kind of talked a little bit about dopamine last time, but the diaphysis stress perspective and dopamine are two of the biggest culprits that we have when it comes to causes of schizophrenia. Diaphysis stress means that people are thought to be born with a biological predisposition to get schizophrenia. So a genetic marker or predisposition, which may or may not ever come to the surface, depending on what happens in their life. So if somebody has a stressor, a trauma, it could be the use of a drug-induced schizophrenia, something that we sometimes reference. So this could be something that brings about the schizophrenia to come to the surface. I had a friend, I can't remember if I mentioned it in this class or the other, I had a friend in graduate school whose husband went off to war, and the stress of war caused him to develop schizophrenia, right? So if you never have that environmental trigger, you might not ever develop schizophrenia, but we don't yet 100% know the genetic markers. There's a lot of research being done on genetic expressions of schizophrenia. So this is something that's got a lot of potential in the future. But this perspective combines two things. You're genetically predisposed and you have the environmental trigger, right? You would have to have both in order for that to happen. The other one has to do with too much dopamine. And we talked about this a little last time, that an excessive amount of dopamine is really thought to play a big role in why people develop schizophrenia. It produces the symptoms of hallucinations and delusions and so on. And there's also a couple of brain structures that are thought to maybe play a role, as we talked a little bit about, but it's very correlational. It's hard to know what caused what and in what order they appeared. I have a little video that introduces these a little bit. I'll play it for you. It's not the most thrilling, but I do think that it's helpful. And then there's a second part to it with the drugs that we'll get to in a moment. So I'll play it. But I like that he kind of shows you some of those neurotransmitters, some of those brain structures. Prenatal influences can sometimes play a part. A lot of biological stuff, right? So genetics, neurotransmitters, dopamine being a big one, and then environmental events triggering that predisposition that we already have in place. So it's a lot of very, very heavy biological contributions. Yes.
If there's prenatal influences, does that mean that when the child's born that they could have it as a young infant, or
it could
1 or 2 year old?
Yeah, it could mean that as a child they have childhood schizophrenia, or it could mean that they have that biological predisposition just in place, and then that could be triggered later in life. Usually it's the 20s and 30s where it comes to the surface, but as we talked about before, it can happen during childhood as well. So it could be that they start off with schizophrenia, or it could develop later on. Either way. There are some other views. These don't have a lot of merit, but I will mention them. Freud talked a lot about something he called the schizophrenic mother, right? Someone who looks cold and angry, maybe. I tried to find someone who looked angry, yelling at you. But the schizophrenic mother is a type of mother who was supposedly cold and domineering and angry, uninterested. It was thought for a long time that a schizophrenic mother could cause schizophrenia in her children. Right. Freud was all about that relationship with the mom. So this makes sense from a Freudian perspective. What we have, we've expanded it to now is to say that the family dynamic can contribute to some degree to schizophrenia. The amount of expressed emotion in a family, the level of criticism and disapproval and hostility and all of these things is thought to maybe exacerbate or even be that environmental trigger that could cause somebody to develop schizophrenia. So there are some socio-cultural, psychological views that play a role, but they're not nearly as prominent as the biological stuff. And sometimes, because we see such high levels of homelessness, right, we sometimes talk about that being a correlate or a factor. But when people end up with a diagnosis of schizophrenia, sometimes that can exacerbate it and make it worse. And so that could be another kind of a cultural or sociocultural factor that could play a role. Again, mostly biology, but these do have a little bit of idea behind them, especially the expression within a family environment. If it's very hostile and negative, that's thought to maybe be that trigger that could bring it to the surface. In terms of treatment, psychotic disorders like schizophrenia, right, present significant obstacles to treatment. It's very difficult to treat somebody if they're not in contact with reality. Traditional therapy is not going to work with somebody who is schizophrenic, right? And so somebody who has this disorder, right, they're going to struggle with traditional therapy because they're not going to know what's real or what's not. That might be part of a treatment plan, but it shouldn't be the whole thing. If we go back into like the mid 1900s, remember we moved out of like some of the old darker ideas into something that we called milieu therapy. And we talked about this before, that dance in a madhouse and some of like giving people who are institutionalized a little bit more like responsibility and self-respect and dignity. Going back to like the 1950s, we have tried to treat disorders like schizophrenia in a more humane kind of way. These were very stigmatized disorders treated very cruelly early on. And now we try and treat them through a much more like respectful climate. Right? And so what we see is a lot of medication, which we'll get to on the next slide. And sometimes if people are institutionalized, they might do something like a token economy, right? You get little awards or points for good behaviors that you can trade in, trying to teach people to act appropriately. These are very commonly used with children. I guarantee every single one of you had a token economy at some point in your life. If you ever had a sticker chart where you got stickers that you could trade in for something, my kids have like little, they call them gold cards. They'll come home and be like, I got a gold card today. If I get 2 more, I can get a prize, right? That's a token economy. Good behavior is awarded with a point or a token or a sticker or a card. And then you can change that in for something that you want. Privileges or goods or prizes or something like that. Sometimes when people are hospitalized, we use these systems as a way to try and encourage proper or like healthy good behavior. But for the most part, treatment for schizophrenia really involves medication. We have to reduce the dopamine. We have to reduce those neurotransmitters in order to get people to be able to function, right? If we keep those levels high, then the symptoms are so out of control that people struggle to stay in contact with reality. And the type of drugs that we would use here are called antipsychotic drugs. They fight psychosis, right? They help to correct grossly confused thinking, distorted thinking, reduce dopamine to reduce those hallucinations and delusions. These were discovered in the 1940s and 50s, and they've been refined and refined multiple times since. They're typically called neuroleptic drugs. Or conventional antipsychotics. Those are kind of used interchangeably. They produce a lot of negative side effects. Neuroleptic drugs came because they produce neurological symptoms. Oftentimes people who take these drugs get what are called extrapyramidal effects. They shake. They get what's called akathisia, right? They're like restless and shaking, like Parkinsonian-like symptoms. Oftentimes people have these tremors and extreme restlessness. These are difficult drugs to tolerate. They are very, very hard to tolerate, but they can produce an incredible range of positive outcomes as well. And so they can do things like extrapyramidal effects, tardive dyskinesia, where people have this like even after they've gone off the drugs. So these can be very, very hard to tolerate. And some of the new ones, the atypical antipsychotics, are better, like the ones that are more recently developed. But as a group, these are very challenging drugs, and it's challenging for people to remember to take them too. So some of them are like a controlled release or an extended release to help account for maybe difficulties remembering to take it. Yeah.
When you say more efficient or drugs with less side effects, recently, could you frame that for me? What would be recent?
Sure. So within the last maybe like 15 to 20 years, so since maybe like 2000, you could say, these atypical antipsychotics are more specific. They're more targeted. So it's kind of like the MAOIs and tricyclics versus the SSRIs and SNRIs that we talked about in the depression unit. These newer ones, they target dopamine more specifically, so they produce less side effects. And yeah, I would say comfortably within the last like 20 years, would be these atypical drugs. Yeah.
So these drugs, they have to be monitored by like a doctor.
Yeah, and sometimes people need blood work to monitor like the levels in their system. Yeah, and they do require pretty intense monitoring, especially in the preliminary parts where you're trying to get the dosage and drug right. But yeah, people typically go see a psychiatrist or a doctor weekly, if not like bi-monthly, like twice a month, in order to make sure everything is on balance. Or in severe cases are hospitalized. It's not the norm. There aren't a lot of facilities anymore, but sometimes people are hospitalized as a way to monitor their medications. So let me play that follow up with the medication, full kind of going through some of those different drugs. The like classic one that people always talk about is Thorazine, right? Like if you've ever heard anyone mention Thorazine, that's like the old, one of the first types of antipsychotic drugs that was developed. And then clozapine and some of these others. There are new ones like Abilify is actually an antidepressant, but also an antipsychotic. So there's an incredible number of these drugs. But the atypical ones, which came out at the very end of the 90s and then like were popularized in the 2000s, these ones are much better. So if somebody went to a doctor, they would traditionally start with an atypical antipsychotic, and it can produce a lot of those extrapyramidal effects and like Parkinsonian kind of things. And so they are, as I said, monitored quite closely by doctors. So these can absolutely eliminate a lot of the symptoms of schizophrenia, but then they create other problems too with some of the like physical stuff that it can cause. Any thoughts or questions, comments, anything here? Therapy wasn't really an option before medications, right? Medications help ground someone in reality. And then we can do therapy. Very popular now. We talked about this back in chapter 1, which feels like a long time ago at this point. But we used to institutionalize people with schizophrenia. Schizophrenia, you went into a hospital and you stayed in there, and maybe for a very extended period of time. Now we believe in deinstitutionalization, right? Not treating people in these massive facilities, trying to treat people more in like outpatient houses, halfway houses, like individual private therapy and psychiatry. We used to have all of those massive state hospitals that were shut down and converted, like we talked about. My partner's out at Cal State Channel Islands today, and I was like, "Ooh, the abandoned hospital! Like, check it out for me." She said it looked old, but that's all she had to say. Right? I've never been up there, but there's so many of these places that we used to utilize, and we don't lock people away anymore. Now it's more of a community treatment, but we get something called the revolving door syndrome with schizophrenia. Very common with this disorder specifically, that people get on a medication, they get balanced, they get everything under control, and then they're released. And what happens is they forget to take their medication. They slip through the cracks, they deteriorate, and they have to be hospitalized and get back on track, get back on their medication, and then they're released. And they're like in and out like a revolving door of treatment. So community care is promising, but it's oftentimes not enough, especially if people don't have good like family support or like a good network of support in their life. So there tend to be some issues with treatment, and not a lot of places where people can like be hospitalized for long-term periods of time. It's just not the norm anymore. And we treat people on an outpatient basis. Sometimes people living in like group homes or like having facilities they go to for resources, but we don't tend to lock people away hardly at all anymore. Only for short periods of time to get them back on medication, and then we tend to be released. So lots and lots of medications, a little bit of therapy, other support, and so on. But definitely probably the most difficult and severe of the disorders that we cover because somebody has lost contact with reality. Other stories or questions, thoughts, comments, anything else on related to chapter 12 in schizophrenia before we move on? Other thoughts or questions? Okay, so then we will move to chapter 13. Oops. I opened it and it left me. So chapter 13, we will look at the personality disorders, which should be really helpful for a lot of you with your characters in your papers. A lot of you have been thinking that your character might have a personality disorder. So that's what we'll focus on for the next couple of days, is looking at some of these disorders that are related to your personality. Now, these are super controversial because you're basically, in essence, saying that somebody's personality, everything about who they are, that is disordered. And that's a hard one to swallow, and it's hard to change. If it's everything about who you are, that's difficult to change. But there are 10 of these, and we'll talk about all 10 of them. I'll write up some words for each one to help you keep them straight. There's a lot of overlap, but we'll talk about the odd, dramatic, and anxious disorders. And then at the end, some causes and treatments all together. And every single one of you has a personality, right? We all have a personality. It's what makes us unique. It's the thoughts, feelings, behaviors, patterns, preferences, everything about what makes you you. You are different from the person sitting next to you. You're different from probably every other individual on this planet, right? You have things that make you unique. And personality is very enduring. The person that you are as a baby and as a child is very similar in a lot of ways to the person you will be as an adult. Now, we can change depending on life experiences and the people around us. But personality is a long-term pattern of inner experience and outward behavior. And we all have one personality, or we have dissociative identity disorder, right, which we talked about earlier. So one personality. But the essence of personality is that it's flexible. You can adapt, you can change, you can evolve. You might bring out different parts of who you are around different people. Personality disorders are when you have inflexible and maladaptive ways of thinking and behaving that typically start very early in life, and they cause you problems. They cause distress. They cause issues relating to other people, functioning in the world. You're very rigid in the way that you approach things. Everything is kind of catered around this disorder. And as I mentioned, there are 3 clusters of these: odd, dramatic, and anxious. And we'll talk about each one of them. But your personality, right, that you have is generally flexible, and personality disorders aren't. They're very rigid, very fixed, and tend to have certain ways of approaching things and viewing things that are hallmark of each one of them. And I have lots of little clips as we go through this, lots of characters in movies with these disorders, just to try and help understand them a little better. But we'll talk about the odd, dramatic, and anxious ones. There's this chart in your book that gives you a quick overview of the odd and eccentric ones, anxious and fearful ones, and then the dramatic or emotional ones. 3, 3, and 4, right? So 10 of them all together. And we'll talk about each one. How many of you think your character in your show might have a personality disorder? Right? A few of you, I saw a couple of these. One side note, you can only have one personality disorder. Okay, it's not a hard rule, but it's very encouraged that you only have one. Because if you have more than one, you're implying that you have more than one personality. Okay, so one personality disorder max. So if your character might have one of these, you have to pick one. You could comment on other things that seem to fit, but only one. In general, that is the recognized norm, that you only would diagnose one of them. Yeah.
So by that, if you had DID, you could put personalities and different personality disorders.
Yes, they could, right? In theory, if you had dissociative identity disorder, your personality is going to have different personalities.
So in theory.
In theory, yeah, it's totally possible. It's not by any means common, but it could happen. I mean, it's not a common disorder already. That you could even have a personality that has schizophrenia, right? To make it super complicated, right? And the media loves to blend schizophrenia and dissociative identity disorder already. Fight Club does that really well. Blend the two of them in kind of a confusing, dramatic way. Typically, you don't see that very often, but it is possible that you could have different personality disorders among the personalities. And one of them could even have schizophrenia. Just not common. And it makes it confusing for sure. Yeah.
Okay, so this is kind of another.
Yeah.
So I'm kind of having a hard time wrapping my head around the different personalities. So aren't they kind of made up by that person?
for dissociative identity disorder. So typically they serve a purpose. Okay, not always, but let's say you have somebody like I told you the story of my client that I had, right? She was super shy and timid. So she created a personality that was outgoing, extroverted, very friendly. And it was counter to. So sometimes people, when they experience trauma, they create a personality that's opposite of who they are. Or they might create multiple personalities that each capture like a different trait, or have a different dominant area. And so that's often the case, or it could be random, but they typically have a purpose. And so the treatment goal then is to find out the purpose and then eliminate it by integrating it into the normal person, the main person. It's confusing. It's a really rare disorder, but typically those identities serve a purpose. So we'll start with the odd personality disorders. And I changed the color. It looked like it was a little hard to see, so I kind of, sorry, it's like white and black at times here, but the odd personality disorders are dominated by odd and eccentric behavior. So, and people being odd and eccentric oftentimes leads to being very isolated, maybe even very lonely, because their behavior is so odd and eccentric. So starting with paranoid personality disorder, paranoid. Like I said, I'll write a few words up for each one just to kind of help you keep them straight. There's a lot of overlap. But somebody with paranoid personality disorder has a pattern of being really suspicious and mistrustful of others. It's not as severe as paranoid schizophrenia, but it's more pervasive. It's lasted a longer time. It might go across all circumstances. So they're very suspicious. I just got the stupid "don't be suspicious" thing in my head. Now you can have that too if you didn't have it before. Mistrustful of others. They don't trust other people. They think other people are out to get them, out to hurt them in some way. They have a lot of unjustified doubts about the loyalty of other people. So doubts about loyalty. And they're oftentimes looking for hidden meanings in things. Conspiracies, conspiracy theories. People are out to get you, right? People not being trustworthy. People have other motives, right? People must be talking about me. Just pervasive paranoia, but not as intense as somebody with like schizophrenia who has paranoia. So it's like a more pervasive but lower grade. Tendency to read a lot of like meanings into benign remarks, thinking everyone means them harm. Oftentimes, individuals with this disorder don't get close to other people because they don't trust them, right? They think that they have a hidden agenda or hidden meaning or hidden reason for being with them. This can make relationships with other people very difficult. If you never trust people and you're always suspicious and looking for hidden meanings and reading into the things they say, this isn't always the easiest person to be friends or maybe even partners with. So it's a very like pervasive pattern of being suspicious and mistrustful. And it starts from a very young age. Almost all of these you see evidence of from a very young age, but you can't diagnose until someone is 18. It's encouraged to not diagnose a personality disorder until someone is technically an adult. The reason for that is as a teenager, your brain is still developing, right? And you're going through a lot of identity changes as a teenager anyway. And so we wait till that is kind of partway through, and we try not to diagnose these until someone is 18 or older. It's a hard rule with a few of them and encouraged with all of them. So I have a clip of this one from an older movie called Conspiracy Theory. And the main character in this definitely has paranoid personality disorder, looks for hidden meanings in everything, sets traps in case people get into his home. He locks his fridge so people won't steal or contaminate his food. It's kind of brilliant in a way, right? The children always eat my ice cream. Should lock it. Lock it up. You can't get into it. But I'll play this clip for you. Conspiracies, right? Connections between why is the shuttle launch here and the president visiting Turkey and so on, like looking for, connections between these events. You see all of his stuff locked up, right? Like his fridge is locked, all the cabinet behind, everything is locked up and like barred off. How many locks did he have on his door? And then he puts a bottle there just in case somebody does get in, he would know that they got in, right? Just kind of all of these elaborate setups, being paranoid that someone could contaminate his food, break into his place, that there are things going on in the world, right? That he's trying to connect the dots between. Very common with this disorder. And again, people tend to be very isolated and lonely because they don't trust other people. So they don't feel comfortable having other people in their life. They often work alone or work from home in environments where they don't have to work around other people. So very pervasive, but again, less intense than schizophrenia. Yeah.
And people go different ways, and I like that you talk a lot of friction. But do you find in your field that, a lot of clips that people see are very atypical? Would you say most of the things that we might see that would suggest a psychological framework are incorrect? Or would you say, as a rule of thumb, they're usually pretty valid if some field way of it?
It's mixed. I mean, the media loves to blend disorders together. They love to make things, I mean, you can make it more dramatic by combining a bunch of things together, right? Like I just mentioned Fight Club, and that movie, he hallucinates in addition to having multiple personalities, which isn't super typical. Bates Motel has dissociative identity disorder, and then he hallucinates seeing his mom, which isn't super common. So, I mean, sometimes the media doesn't portray it well. I try and pick clips that are portrayed as accurately
I'm sure you.
and to point out when they're not.
Let me say, so my background is a legal background, and usually things are portrayed really, most of the time, but really inaccurate.
And that's why it's so hard to find good like examples in the media. There's a million examples, but good ones, where they're accurate, tough, because the media doesn't always portray it in the right way. And I know a lot of you are running into that problem with your character. A lot of you have asked me like, it fits, but not perfectly, right? And that's so normal for a movie or a TV show. And as long as you take some time to talk about that, like a paragraph to say, oh, they clearly have paranoid personality disorder, but there's like all this other stuff too that doesn't quite fit. That's pretty common. The media loves to make things more dramatic, like combining them. Yeah.
Going off that idea of media making it more dramatic, obviously he clearly has the paranoid personality.
Right. Yeah.
Are there people with that same disorder that, to maybe lessen? So,
Yeah.
save checks, and it might be harder to balance.
Yeah. Yeah. And it might be, I mean, and where do you, the tricky thing, where do you draw the line between somebody who's just kind of a little paranoid versus having a disorder? Right. Like I have people in my life who are always paranoid, like they're convinced of all sorts of things that like may or may not be grounded in reality. I mean, I don't know. And it's when it starts to affect your relationships, when it starts to affect your life, your job, your whatever, that we classify it as a disorder. But there's no like clean line, right? And so sometimes you have people who have this in a very mild way, where it may or may not be diagnosed depending on who they go to. And then you have people, it's like, it's blatantly obvious, like in the clip I just showed you. Yeah.
Like, I don't know if you know. Who said that? You guys, he's like a political commentator.
Oh,
He's always, got the meeting behind him to say rocks again.
yeah.
Crazy stuff. It's funny though.
Yeah.
So is that?
I know you're talking about
just
that.
like.
It could be. And sometimes people are just like odd and eccentric. And like, does that go to disorder or is it just strange? It's, again, there's no fine line. It's usually when it starts to be a problem and this person is like, obviously like famous for these things. So it's not a problem. Yeah. And it might be dramatic, like it might be exaggerated, right? Like a lot of people, we've mentioned TikTok a couple of times today, like that personas that they have on there are exaggerated to get views, to get money, to get sponsors. And so it's tough to know how much is authentic, right? Yeah, there's no clear line, which is diagnostically tricky for sure. Schizoid personality disorder, schizoid and schizotypal. They both have a little bit of that schizophrenia-like term in there. Schizoid is a personality disorder where people avoid social relationships. They express very little emotion. See, she's listening. Right? But they express very little emotion. These are a lot of the negative symptoms of schizophrenia. Not a lot of volition, not a lot of emotion, not a lot of speaking. So this person tends to be very solitary. They avoid relationships. They tend to not have a lot of meaningful relationships with other people by choice, right? They tend to be very, very solitary, have a lot of emotional coldness. Right, so very little emotion, very cold in their expressions of emotions, and a restricted range of emotions. Really good example of this, Bruce Wayne would be a good example of someone with schizoid personality disorder. Bruce Wayne in like the newer Batman movies, not so much like the old ones, but the new ones, very socially isolated, doesn't express a lot of emotion. He only has a few people that matter to him and are close to him. Very solitary, kind of some strange, like atypical stuff going on with him. I think he's a great example of someone with schizoid personality disorder. Again, avoiding relationships because they're uncomfortable around others, very solitary by choice. So don't tend to be super lonely because it's a choice, but very restricted emotions and so on. I think the other one's a little different, a little interesting. Schizotypal. Again, some of the schizophrenia-like stuff. Schizoid is very negative symptoms of schizophrenia, right? With those restricted and like blunted things. Schizotypal is somebody who has a lot of odd thinking and perceiving. They're very eccentric, kind of strange or odd, beyond just like a little bit. We could add here, they tend to have a lot of odd, eccentric, and peculiar behavior. Odd, eccentric, peculiar behavior. Also, other things I could say, a lot of paranoid ideation. So some paranoia stuff, can a lot of conspiracy kind of things as well. And then we also see like a lot of distortions, like cognitive distortions. Strange beliefs and ideas about reality is kind of common. I have a story about schizotypal personality disorder. I had strange friends in high school, right? I probably terrified my parents a little bit, but I had a friend in high school that everybody on the campus called knee pads. That was her nickname. Her name was Christy, but everyone called her knee pads because she wore a cape, knee pads, and elbow pads to school every day. Kind of stands out, a little different. And she used to wear this big trench coat, but this was at the time of like Columbine and some of those things. Trench coats became banned. So she wore a sheet as a cape and fought it that it wasn't in the dress code and got away with it. So she would wear a cape, knee pads, elbow pads, very like all black, kind of very strange individual. Doesn't stop there though. So this individual, Christy, believed that she was half human, half dragon. And her dragon half was male, but her human half was female. So another layer. And she would walk around campus, like around school, and randomly stop and go like this to sprout her dragon wings, right? I never saw wings, but it was wildly entertaining anyway. She would flick people with her random dragon tail, right? Or like pretend to flick people with her dragon tail. When she got a little older, she changed her name to her dragon name, like to her given dragon name, to Kaistarin something, or I can't remember all of it. But she legally changed her name to her dragon name. And she believed that the world was going to end and she would turn back into her dragon self and carry on. These are all really abnormal things, like to believe and to think. And I thought she was so fascinating, right? This was someone I was friends with for like a year, and then I was like, okay, it's too much, right? But for a year, I found it super interesting. And there were other people in the group who thought they were like elves and things, like really interesting people. You could just imagine my high school life, right? But she believed this to be true. Came from a family with a lot of like abuse and like a very negative environment. Kind of see where some of this is coming from if I look back on it now as like from a psychology background. But a lot of odd thinking, again, thinking she was part dragon, thinking the world was going to end and she would fly away as her dragon self, right? Changing her name. Those are all kind of like odd and eccentric behaviors. This tends to have a lot of that goes with it. I have an example of a clip of somebody with this that I think is a really good example. Luna from the Harry Potter movies, right? She's not nearly as severe in a sense as like knee pads was. But still those kind of odd thinking, kind of peculiar behavior, they tend to be kind of isolated because of it, not necessarily by choice, but just because people think they're odd, right? And so I have a clip of that that I'll play for you. Luna is a great example. To empathize or understand where other people are coming from. Very typical of this disorder.
Smell. It smells like a woman.
Which part?
I'm having intimate relations with La Vuelta.
Congratulations. Maybe if I don't blink, my eyes will tear up. I hate this.
Share something with her. What you did when you were her age.
I killed the neighbor's dog.
Well, don't tell her that.
Paul's dead.
Oh? Oh. Oh.
Yeah. Oh.
Yeah, the county will bury Paul for free. I mean, he wasn't even your husband. Anymore. Technically.
I have feelings for you.
I have feelings for you too.
I love you.
I'm so thankful. I'm sure you wouldn't do anything like that.
What are you talking about? Doing like what?
Like, try to sleep your way to the top.
You douche.
Sorry for your loss.
I can't wear any of this to school.
Esther, come on, no one's gonna notice you.
I guess you saw somebody bashed in Kate's bird bath.
Oh, I know, that's awful.
Poor birds. And poor Kate.
Doesn't matter that it makes me happy or it makes me feel how you're supposed to feel when you're with the right person. Is that crazy?
I got nothing. Harry's first rule was don't get emotionally involved. I think this is why.
All right, so just I'm looking at it from that lack of empathy side, right? He obviously he commits a lot of murders as well, right? He kills